Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hypertrophy Past and Present. And today we have no technological difficulties. Goodness me, I can't even speak today. No technological difficulties, but I've got some verbal difficulties going on. Chris, I was listening to your podcast with Rob this week, and I had a little bit of a giggle because you obviously do this bit. You introduce the podcast when you do your other podcast. And I noticed that you never start the podcast by asking how Rob is doing. And I always start by asking how you're doing. And it became apparent to me that you probably hate it when I do that. And that's why you don't expose other people to it. But nonetheless, I'm still going to do it. So how are you doing today?
I'm okay under the circumstances. Thank you.
Okay. So before we jump into today's topic, what are we doing? We're reminding you all about a very exciting announcement that we made last week. If you didn't listen to our episode last week, you won't know what it is. And that is that we are launching a webinar certification course. So go back and listen last week because we did talk about it a little bit more, but we will be announcing more details soon. It's going to be a year-long webinar series certification course, which is a mouthful. I'm sure there's a better way, more succinct way
Well,
of
it's a
saying
certification, isn't it? I mean, we're doing a certification. It's advanced programming certification, and it's based on a series of webinars. So that's how we're delivering the material, isn't it? We're delivering the material using webinars because it's the most kind of efficient way for us to deliver the material, and it's also the best for the person who's receiving the information because they can receive the information either by attending or they can get the download afterwards. So it works for everyone.
Yeah, and it allows us the opportunity to do more interactive stuff as well. So we're in the certification process.
Exactly.
We are offering between each webinar module, a topic, we're going to have a tutorial webinar as well. So it'll be an opportunity for you guys who are doing the certification to come on board, even present us with case studies. We'll work through that. So yeah, it's a little bit more interactive as well. So
totally, loads of opportunity to ask questions. I mean, that's the key thing. It's an enormous amount of access to our brains throughout the process, really.
Yeah. And as we talked about last week, the goal here is really to present you guys with the tools to work with the type of clients that you're likely to get as modern day coaches and PTs. You know, everyone's done the fat loss stuff. Everyone's done the, hypertrophy 101 stuff. And the goal of this webinar is not to give you the foundational stuff that hopefully at this point you've picked up elsewhere. The goal is to give you the advanced...
From this podcast, one would hope.
Yep, from the last... God, we must be
you're
coming up to a year.
You're the one who tracks the numbers.
Who's
How many
the numbers,
podcasts have we done?
I know it's in the 40s, so we haven't hit 50 yet. But we're getting,
wow. Okay.
44 maybe, something like that. I mean, you guys who are listening will know because it says it's literally in the corner somewhere.
Wow, very close to
Anyway, so the goal here with these webinars is to present you guys with the tools to work with, people who might be experiencing sleep issues and stress issues and gastrointestinal issues and advanced clientele and athletes and powerlifters and even, enhanced lifters and people who might be using peptides or maybe using GLP-1s or all manner of things that you guys are likely to be dealing with nowadays that maybe you weren't dealing with 10 years ago as a coach. And to provide you guys, I guess, the tools to succeed with those clients as well. Anything you want to add?
So we were just going to add this week that we've had loads of questions about the project already since our announcement last week. Most of the questions kind of come down to two important things. Firstly, what is going to be the exact kind of content? What's our list of planned topics? And we're going to deliver that this week. We're going to get a slide out on probably Instagram this week with all of those details. So if you're curious about the exact nature of the course material, that will be going out in the next couple of days. And then obviously the other kind of half of the questions we get is people wanting to know how much is it going to cost and what the kind of early bird discounts are going to be. Well, we're not going to give you that this week. We're going to give you that next week. So keep an eye out for that. And that information will be coming out very, very soon. But yeah, in terms of course content, next couple of days.
Yeah. And we do have an email list on both of our social media profiles, Instagram profiles. Make sure you do, if you haven't yet, sign up to that list. Just pop your email in there because it is going to be, that's where the exclusive early bird discount is going to be. And while we're not announcing what the price is yet, I can confirm that is going to be very good.
We've just been plotting huge discounts, haven't we, before this podcast?
We have huger than I was even thinking of going. So definitely sign up to that list.
I've pushed you pretty far on it.
Okay, today's topic. We are covering. Oh, what are we even calling today's topic?
So this topic is because it's the kind of single most common question I'm getting at the moment. Kind of either people are saying to me, please do a podcast about how the Silver Era bodybuilders approached their programming during a dieting period. So it's not so much asking about, how they were dieting specifically, but just how they were approaching programming during a dieting period. And then obviously, I also get lots of questions just about that from a physiological perspective. How do we change our programs during a dieting period? And I said, well, we can do both of those in the same podcast. So you can do the bit on how people used to approach the programming during a diet back then. And then I can add a bit of physiology, and then we can hash out something together.
So programming during dieting, I'm making it sound like we came to this unprepared. We're not. We did talk about it. I just didn't know what the title would be.
You've just got a brain full of all kinds of other stuff, including all the course structures that we've been plotting.
So Silver Era time, story time. So when we talk about dieting and cutting and what else do people call it? I don't even know.
Definition, you told me, is what they called it.
Well, that's what they called it in the Silver Era, right? Yeah. So if you're looking for a Silver Era cutting plan or fat loss plan or whatever, you're not really going to find it. What you'll find will be a defining plan, definition plan, defining. Sometimes they will talk about reducing, like if someone is overweight, then there'll be a reducing plan. And I think when you do look at this Silver Era stuff, this stuff is very much like a minority, okay? There's not a lot of content on this. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is most of what they were doing when it came to dieting was, in fact, the dieting. And so they do talk about the nutrition component there, and that kind of gets the spotlight when they're talking about this comp prep dieting, cutting side of things. And then the second thing is, and we'll talk about this now, is that the training didn't really change that much. And so I don't think there was a huge emphasis on really talking about the training because they kind of had the foundations in place that made a lot of sense. So if you look at some of the guys who were talking about what they were doing, Steve Reeves, Reg Park, some of the more well-known names, and some who, they were writing magazines or writing courses or whatever, there's I would say a lot of consistency in how they were doing things. And I do want to dispel a bit of a myth because it's easy when you look online to make the assumption that the way these guys were dieting or training for when they were dieting was using heaps and heaps of volume. And if you jump online, you look up, I'm assuming, I haven't tried it, but if you Google like Silver Era fat loss phase or whatever training, whatever, you're probably going to be hit with some ridiculous volumes where they'll say, oh, Steve Reeves was doing, 50 sets per workout and 9 sets of biceps and whatever else. Or Reg was doing, 12 sets of biceps, and they were doing that for the last 2 to 4 weeks before competition. That was not their dieting training plan. Okay, they're clear about that. Like Reg talks in his books, hey, for 2 to 4 weeks before I got on stage, this is what I would do. And they were using that for fat loss. They were using that literally as their physical activity. But in the lead up to the getting on stage, that's not how they were training to actually achieve definition, fat loss, whatever. So what we've got today is a Reg Park plan. And this is going to look a little bit different. So what I've done is I have taken Reg Park's specialization definition course, and I've gone through the recommendations he made, because he basically gives one a formula on how to write a defining plan. And so what I've done is I've written a plan using exactly what he spelled out for us. So you're not going to find this exact workout in a book, in a magazine, whatever, but it's taken directly from the exercise suggestions he's given and the format that he's given. So buckle in because it is a big one, but it is literally exactly how he has described to do it. So what he has suggested is when you are defining, it is important to not just jump up the volume. He says a lot of people make this mistake. They go heaps of sets, heaps of repetitions. He goes, no. definition comes from the variety of exercises one's doing, not from just doing more repetitions, not from doing more sets, using a heavy load for a single set for high variety of exercises. So we've got a wrestler's bridge as our first exercise, which I don't know if we've talked about before. Maybe with some of the Bronze Era stuff we talked about. I think we actually mentioned it last week, incidentally. But this was a neck exercise. Now, in Reg's later work, he didn't really do this, but at this point when he wrote this book, he did suggest it. So wrestler's bridge for a single set. Then we've got a standing dumbbell lateral raise for a single set, a standing front raise with a dumbbell for a single set, a barbell curl. Now, he did say you can do this either strict or cheating. He did use both. And then dumbbell concentration curls, dumbbell incline curls. He did do quite a lot of curling. So he did suggest sort of usually about 3 different curling exercises in these routines. Then an easy bar skull crusher. He called it a triceps curl, but basically it's what we would call a skull crusher today. And then a standing dumbbell triceps extension. Dips, which he did say you could either do on the parallel bars or you could do on the bench. Then a flat dumbbell fly. A pullover, which usually he would do after the squat, but I've ordered it in the muscle groups, but you could move this after the squat. And then a wide grip barbell bench, a bent over barbell row. He didn't specify hand position. He normally did fairly close grip when he was doing that in sagittal plane. A barbell shrug, a lat pull down. Once again, he didn't specify hand position there. Stiff leg deadlift. These are all single sets. A deep knee bend, which is a squat. Iron boot leg extensions. A standing calf raise with the barbell, but obviously you could do that with a machine nowadays. And then concluding with abs, well, he called it waist, which was sit-ups and leg raises. Now, once again, all of this was done for single sets. We've got 21 exercises here, so 21 sets in total. And he did talk about sort of moderate repetitions, somewhere around the 10 repetitions per set mark, and short, like somewhat incomplete rest periods, but he wasn't suggesting just going, flat out one exercise to the next, but he did use shorter rest periods. It's a bit of a mammoth plan. What do you think of that?
So, yeah, I mean, there's lots of important things here to emphasize, aren't there? I mean, first of all, there's an enormous emphasis here on exercise variety and very little emphasis on volume per exercise. So clearly, there's a kind of an interest here in reducing the amount of fatigue that each kind of set of muscle fibers are experiencing. Similarly, there's also a kind of emphasis on targeting as many muscle fibers as possible. So really, really interesting kind of viewpoint here or approach here, because it's essentially saying, and this is presumably done kind of 3 times a week, I'm guessing.
Yes, which is a very important point, because and that's why I think they don't talk so much about these cutting plans that much, because their default is using high variety 3 times a week.
Yeah. So basically it's making sure that there's very, very little chance of any muscle fiber that's being trained at any point in the program from experiencing atrophy, because it's getting hit pretty much at the end of every stimulus period that's going on. So yeah, high chance of avoiding atrophy. Obviously less stimulus per session, but that's probably a good thing if you're not really able to achieve an enormous amount of kind of growth in that period of time anyway. So very, very cool kind of basic structure straight away. In terms of exercise selection, I mean, this is kind of half you, half Reg, isn't it? I mean, it's like you're kind of...
It is. So what I did, just for context for people listening, so he split it up into muscle groups, and he gave around maybe 5 exercise suggestions per muscle group.
They're his exercises, but you've picked them. So it's kind of like
I've picked the first
options.
2 to 3 per muscle group that he recommended.
Really? Okay,
Yeah.
so this isn't you like kind of deliberately picking the best ones.
No,
Oh
it's
wow.
not. No, literally, this is
Oh,
the first
okay.
ones you
Well,
recommend.
that's that.
Yeah.
In which case, that's actually a lot better than I thought. I thought you'd have to go hunting for these. So
No, I was tempted, but no, I did not configure
that's
this.
okay. Wow. No, this is actually then a lot better than I expected it to be, and that also explains one or two of the slightly odd choices. But okay, cool. What do you just for clarity then, starting at the top, what do you think the wrestler's bridge is actually training, or is he just kind of doing it as a bit of a warm up there?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously they talk about this as a neck exercise, and he gave other
Okay.
alternatives as a neck exercise. There is going to be some hip involvement in it because they are using a barbell usually. So I've never experimented with it myself to see kind of what kind of neck stimulus one does seem to get. But
I'm certainly not going to try at my age. So, yeah, leave that one for somebody else who's a lot braver than I am. Okay, cool, understood. So basically, we've got some single joint stuff for the shoulders. Actually, whether the front raise is more of a clavicular pec is a separate question. But curls, we've got 3 variations of curls. A little bit of variety there in terms of the regions. Obviously, incline is going to get a little bit maybe more of the biceps. Maybe if it's a cheating curl, you might get a little bit more brachioradialis. Not sure what the concentration curl is going to do.
you know
So
what?
yeah,
Just on the curls, because that's been a topical conversation this week.
sure.
And people have been arguing a lot about, do you need different curls? Is one curl going to do it? And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go back and look at what the Silver Area guys said. I had a bit of a suspicion, but I thought, let's just get some good data here. And I went back to all of Reg's advanced plans. I went back to Steve's plans. I went back to John Grimmick and what he was talking about. And there was actually consistency in each, and these are the first, second, third Mr. Universes, right? And literally all of them said to do a curl that had essentially a flexed shoulder position. They all had either a neutral shoulder position or extended shoulder position curl. And they all had a unilateral curl. And all of them were saying that doing 3 different curls was their preferred way of training an advanced arms
So that they're
lifter.
actually definitely coming down hard on the side of variety then for elbow
Yep.
flexor training. That's
Yep.
a really important data point because, like you've been saying, there is a trend for the moment people to react against our kind of biggest arms ever kind of episode. And saying basically you just need to do curls and you forget about any kind of variety. Now, sure, I mean, like I am just going to do a single curl variation. I mean, I'm not interested in kind of maximizing my kind of arm size at this point in my life. But yeah, I think if you're aiming for high level bodybuilding success, I don't see how one curl variation is going to do it if you want to stay natural at least. So yeah. But just kind of like a very quick rabbit hole on that particular issue. Ultimately, let's just kind of start by saying, okay, where are these opinions coming from? I mean, everybody has obviously their own opinion about kind of what good exercises are for each muscle group, but ultimately there are only really 2 valid ways of justifying a set of opinions or an opinion. Either you can have a physiological model that says this is how I think the brain allocates motor unit recruitment and activates muscle fibers so that they are exposed to active and passive mechanical tension. So please don't tell me that you can just use passive tension and you don't need to have activation of the fibers, because unless you're doing a static stretch, you do. So how are you applying that motor unit recruitment signal and exposing the fibers to active and passive mechanical tension? And then you can start to basically make arguments about how these muscles are going to experience growth depending on the exercise selection that you are kind of arguing for. So I'm going, okay, I think that the biceps brachii are going to be activated most in this position. I think the brachialis in this position and the brachioradialis in the other position. And here is the kind of protocol or the framework that I'm arguing for that justifies that. It is a physiology-based framework. I'm arguing from the basis of neuromechanical matching. And here are the kind of moment-on data kind of points that I've collected and the long-term training studies that fit in with that kind of model. So you can either do that. You can either say this is a physiological model that I'm arguing for. And to my knowledge, there's only one available physiological model that has any kind of legs right now, and it's the neuromechanical matching model. Everybody else is arguing against it, but they don't have their own arguing for it. So ultimately, what I'm seeing at the moment is like you've got literally one available physiological model. If you haven't got that, the only thing you've then got is outcome studies. So all you can then do is say, these are the outcome studies, and I'm going to kind of analyze all of them and tell you what I think, each exercise is likely to do based on those long-term studies. Well, we're not very far away from having AI do that for you. So the reality is that either you can kind of go down the neuromechanical matching model argument and say, this is what I think exercises are going to do, and that will kind of give you an answer. Or you can go down the route of saying, I'm just going to be an outcome kind of devotee, and I'm just going to tell you what the outcome studies say. Now, to be honest, if you just go down the outcome studies route as a kind of to find the best exercises for the elbow flexors, you are going to be swimming in a lot of very, very murky water because they are very, very kind of contradictory in general. But I think you can kind of figure out a way through it if you apply the neuromechanical matching lens, and it kind of steers you towards saying, well, those studies probably aren't like in line with it, so therefore they're probably not right, but these studies are in line with it and they do support it, and that kind of gives you a reasonably confident output as long as you kind of have other reasons to accept that neuromechanical matching is likely correct. You just have to be a little bit kind of have a filter to start with, which is kind of the model that you've decided to work with. But basically those are the only two options. So when people are saying, oh, no, I think that these exercises are best for the elbow flexors, I'm like, yeah, but which approach are you taking? Are you taking a physiological model approach and saying, this is how I think things work, and therefore these are the exercises that I think will work best? Or are you saying, I'm just parsing the outcome studies and I'm kind of navigating a route through those based on what we call evidence? So ultimately, you've either got a science-based approach or you've got an evidence-based approach. As I've said many, many times before, science-based is basically trying to figure out how things work and then going from there. Evidence-based is just saying what the outcome studies say, and then trying to figure out what the kind of appropriate exercise would be based on those. And I don't think that you can actually do it based on outcome studies. So I guess really, for all the people who are making a lot of noise about this at the moment, I would say, tell me which of those two approaches you're taking and justify what your answers are, because I don't see anybody who is giving an alternative physiological explanation.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think what's interesting with the outcome-based approach is, and we've talked about this when we talk about things like splits, when we talk about volume, is so much of the details get missed entirely in the outcomes, right? And whether that's because of duration, whether that's because of sample size or whatever. And so what you see with people who are then aligning themselves purely with outcomes is everything becomes diminished, and suddenly kind of nothing really matters. Like it just defaults back to lowest common denominator. Frequency doesn't matter that much. Split doesn't matter that much. Exercise variety doesn't matter that much. Nothing really matters that much.
There's a number of problems, and that's an interesting kind of umbrella that sits across all of them. Really, the problem is that if you want to do this job that we do, I guess, if you want to do this kind of like kind of analysis that we do, then if you want to do it purely based on outcome studies, you actually have to include every single one. You can't do it without including every single one, because the whole point of relying on outcome studies is that your entire evidence base is not how things work, but what data says from a long-term perspective. So if somebody is posting like an Instagram post and they're saying, oh, look, these two studies show this outcome-based information, I'm like, just swipe away, because ultimately every single kind of analysis like that has to include every single study, otherwise it's garbage. Whereas if we're going from a model, then we say, look, this is what the model says. If you have an outcome study that slightly disagrees with that, it's more likely that the outcome study is wrong than that every single study showing that this model works, of which there are dozens, is wrong. So if you start with a kind of a understanding of what the model is and the physiological reality, then yeah, you've got a bunch of outcome studies that largely sit with that. Fine, okay. If a couple of them don't, well, they're probably wrong. Whereas if you're just literally doing it from an evidence-based point of view, you can't do that. You have to include every single study. So straight away, it's actually misleading to post a couple of outcome studies and say, oh, look, these couple of outcome studies show this thing that I believe, therefore it's right. I'm like, no, dude, you have to show every single one if you want to do it from an outcomes perspective. Otherwise, it's a garbage analysis. And then, as you say, what happens is if you literally just do it from an outcome perspective, you end up with an incredibly murky situation because you don't know which of these studies is more likely to be correct and which one is more likely to be true. You literally just have to base it on statistical kind of factors and go, well, this study had these statistical features, so it's more likely to be, and that's what we do when we do meta-analyses. We have a process called weighting. Basically, you weight studies according to their kind of what you perceive to be their statistical validity. And you give those studies heavier weights because you think they're more likely to be true. It doesn't mean actually that they are more likely to be true, but that's a separate question. So, but anyway, you end up with a kind of very, very murky picture, which, as you say, flattens out the kind of subtleties and wrinkles that actually might be very informative for you to understand how things work. So you just end up with this very, very muddy picture, which is like, yeah, strength training works. I'm like, yes, we know that strength training works. I've said this many, many times. A number of times people come on my social media and say, oh, so you're saying that, kind of this kind of works or that works. And I'm like, yeah, strength training works. But what we're trying to get at here is what works slightly better. And you can't do it with outcome studies for the reasons that you're just saying. It's too murky. It's too flat as a data set. You just end up squeezing out all of the subtleties and all of the interesting bits.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think that's a really good framework to be working off when you're looking online at what you're seeing educators post, is thinking to yourself, what lens are they coming at this from? Is it
Totally.
a physiology base or is it just outcome based?
Are you trying to understand how it works and then go from there? Or are you just saying, it's evidence, it's just a list of outcome studies? If you're going down the list of outcome studies, you need all of them. You can't do it with just 3. And that's what most science-based evidence-based social media posting is at the moment in the area that we're in. It's just people posting a couple of studies and saying, look, this is what these studies say. I'm like, yeah, well, what about the other 17 that you didn't talk about? You can't do evidence-based without having every single study. It doesn't make sense. Whereas if you've got a physiological model, then you've started from a position of having some knowledge about the way things work, and then you can be a little bit more relaxed about your outcome studies because they're not as important.
So, where were we?
So we were going through the list of exercises that you identified as the first couple in each section.
We got to curls.
And we got to curls.
That's where this conversation.
And I was kind of having a rant about how there is a lot of pushback on the episode that we did about how to get the biggest arms ever. And I pointed out that most of the pushback is rubbish because it just starts from either people trying to argue that physiology works without actually having a validated model. They just go, oh, well, we think that, the active link tension relationship governs where the brain sends activation. I'm like, okay, have you got a study that demonstrates that model happening? I'm like, oh, no, we just think it. I'm like, okay, well, it's probably not happening then. You've got tons of studies showing that the neuromechanical matching principle is validated, and that's what I'm working with. I'm not working with I thought that. I'm working with this is a validated model. So there isn't another validated model. So physiology has neuromechanical matching model, and that's it. It doesn't have another one. Whereas, evidence-based, again, people are just throwing a couple of studies out there and going, oh, I think this because of that study. I'm like, well, yeah, cool, but what about the other 17? So anyway, in terms of tricep stuff, he's kind of doing he's doing 2 different shoulder positions, but he's not doing a standing one, is he? Unless you argue really that the dips is kind of doing that job.
Doing
so his
what,
skull crusher is going to be at 90 degrees shoulder angle. His triceps extensions are probably going to be kind of with the hand behind the head. And then his dips, I guess, is probably doing the role of the shoulder position in the sort of anatomical or slightly behind the anatomical. So you could argue that the dips is doing that, but again, dips has got some shoulder movement in there. But yeah, again, solid exercise variety, really. I mean, all of this is really good. I mean, look at the pec stuff. I mean, he's got kind of dumbbell fly pullovers, sort of definitely costal pec, really. And then wide grip bench is really duplicating the dumbbell fly, I would say. There's not really much kind of difference between those. Lats, sagittal plus kind of maybe frontal if it's a lat pull down, and then he's got shrugs in there for the traps. Nice to see hamstrings work in the program, but there's only really the one exercise, stiff leg deadlift. I mean, obviously, if
Yeah,
we'd
he
got
basically
our
just
machines, we'd
gave
do a lot
deadlift
more.
variations there as options, so I just selected one because I've never seen Reg program multiple deadlifts in the same
No.
plan, so I don't think that would have been
But I'm not
likely.
even sure multiple deadlifts would make a lot of sense anyway. I mean, they all kind of do very similar things. Squats and knee extensions, obviously, really solid, kind of good coverage for the quads. Calf raise, presumably that is a standing one, but again, probably my selection if you've only got one calf raise. And then I don't tend to comment on ab work, but again, sort of interesting, the fact that he's got 2 exercises rather than 1. I mean, yeah, this is really kind of very, very similar to many of the things we talked about before, where we look at a program and go, given the constraints of the equipment that they had available to them, and given the constraints of what knowledge they had access to, this is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it really is absolutely fantastic. If you were to do, I mean, obviously you might strip out the wrestler's bridge because it's probably quite dangerous. You might strip out kind of the dumbbell fly because you're kind of duplicating it with the bench. You might strip out one of the biceps curls in this list because it probably is duplicating. You might strip out the ab work, and you get it down to maybe sort of 18 or so exercises, single sets, moderately heavy loads,
one more
8 to 10.
exercise.
Probably, well, yeah, we can kind of hash that out in a minute when we do our perfect version. But honestly, this would be better than almost anything else you're going to see online. Or,
It's
I mean,
it's
like,
very
just
good. It's
so
very good.
much better. Just so much better.
Yeah.
Ridiculously good. Doing this 3 times a week, moderately heavy loads, single sets. Really, 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 really solid kind of routine. It's just so impressive when you kind of look at this and you see how good it was at that time. And then you look at what's going on today and you go, what we're doing today is absolute nonsense. I mean, not what we're doing, but what the vast majority of the industry is doing right now is absolute nonsense compared to what these guys were doing.
Yeah. And, this is so similar to what Steve Reeves was doing as well. Like the plan itself is Steve had a few additional exercises, but the format is obviously almost identical. He was doing single sets. He was doing usually 3 exercises per muscle group. This is sort of 2 to 3 exercises. And, obviously he had more total exercises in the workout plan, but very, very similar.
No, really, really solid. I mean, like almost always when we do one of these program reviews, I'm like, it's not bad, at least. I mean, it's at least not bad. I mean, you could do worse. And then sometimes you come across something like this and it's just like, wow, this is just really good. Really, really good. Like, I would literally just be arguing details around specific exercises. I wouldn't really be changing anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? Because I look at a plan like this and I think, yeah, you could run this all the time. This is great.
You could actually run this all the time. So that really kind of is then asking the question, well, what is changing about being in a calorie deficit that means that we might want to change the training program? So, I mean, that's kind of like the question that we need to answer. And, when people have been asking us to do this topic on the podcast, I was kind of at first I was a little bit like kind of, well, we've done this already. We've done 2 full episodes on what calorie deficits do in terms of affecting your recovery rates and also in terms of affecting, the baseline level of muscle growth that's going to happen. So the atrophy hypertrophy balance. But, again, people want a more practical conversation. So let me just whiz through what's happening in a kind of calorie deficit, and then we'll come back to building our own program, I think that would probably be cool. So very, very quickly, when we go into a calorie deficit, we are going to experience a drop in the baseline levels of muscle protein synthesis, and that is going to negatively affect our rates of repair and also our kind of sort of net kind of anabolic status. So we're going to experience a reduction in the kind of ability to maintain the muscle fibers we've got, and also obviously therefore in the amount of benefit that we're going to get from individual workouts. So essentially we are going to see a slowdown in growth and potentially to the point where it starts to produce atrophy, and we're going to see this is assuming we're doing strength training, by the way. So assuming we're doing a strength training program, we're going to start to see a reduction in growth from the workouts we're doing. And that's going to be because both of the suppression of the baseline in the area around the workout, so the stimulus period, and also obviously in the kind of periods outside that, which we would call dissipation or atrophy periods. So essentially the entirety of our muscle protein synthesis kind of level is going to just go downwards. And that is, again, also then going to affect our recovery ability from from each individual workout. So we're going to find that we can't do as much volume, we can't do as kind of many sort of reps close to failure as we were doing previously, or any of the other kind of variables, eccentric stuff and kind of higher repetitions or anything like that. So we're going to see those two negative things happening. And the reality is it's fairly dose responsive. So I said before that if your body perceives the calorie deficit as a stressor, you are going to push into a state where you are going to be losing muscle mass pretty much no matter what you're doing, because you will have a very large glucocortical response from that stressor, and then everything is just going to go in the opposite direction. So you're going to see a big increase in muscle protein breakdown rates, and you're going to see a big suppression of muscle protein synthesis. And then, like what we've got with the meta-analyses of caloric restriction during strength training programs, you're going to get over, and they kind of saw on average around about sort of 500 calorie deficits a day. You kind of tip over into a state where you're probably losing muscle mass, even though you're conducting a strength training program. So I would argue that number probably varies between people depending on how their body perceives the stressor, and it also probably varies a little bit depending on the strength training program, because many of the strength training programs done in research aren't ideal. They tend not to have a high enough frequency, they tend to have too much volume, so you probably could do a little bit better if your program was kind of more like the one we've just been talking about. So ultimately, and I guess just in terms of small details, I'm not going to do a full-on physiological review right now, I'm just giving the headlines, but in terms of small details, I just want to add that yes, protein content will make a little bit of a difference. We do see that if people are kind of or in animal models as well, if the protein levels are low and you add a little bit of protein back in, you do start to see both faster recovery after muscle damage, whether it's exercise or non-exercise injury. And you also see a little bit of a kind of protective effect in terms of kind of muscle growth. But that isn't an absolute kind of kind of universal effect across the entire spectrum of deficits. So if you get towards the sort of higher deficit and it starts to be perceived as a stressor, then it really doesn't matter what the protein content of the diet is. You are going to experience a drop in kind of muscle protein synthesis regardless. The sensitivity of the body to that dietary protein reduces dramatically, and you just don't get the benefit of that. So you can't kind of say, well, I'm just going to eat, nothing but tins of tuna and hope for the... I know that some of these guys did, but, you can't just eat tins of tuna and hope for the best. It isn't going to work like that, because at a certain calorie deficit, the body starts perceiving it as a stressor, and it's just going to ignore the fact that it's kind of protein, and you're not going to get that kind of protective effect on muscle size. So, and there's some really good human data in that, and there's some really good animal data in that. It's fairly universal. So can't really kind of tune our way out of the problem. So that's it. I don't want to do a whole kind of review on the physiology today. We've done 2 episodes. If you want to look back, and we've done the calorie deficit one on recovery. I think we've definitely done the calorie deficit one on atrophy. Full on kind of physiological reviews, and I don't want to do that. Let's talk about how we might structure a strength training kind of program based on those effects. So if we look at this program that we've got in front of us from Reg, I think that's an amazing starting point. But the reason I think it's an amazing starting point is because what I would always want to do is train as frequently as possible with the minimum amount of fatigue and hit as many muscle fibers as I possibly can. So I'd want to do a full body AAA rather than a full body AB, because I want to have that really, really high frequency. And I want to try and get as much variety as I can. So I need to be doing single sets to get that high variety. Now, you've already pointed out you might program like that anyway, and there's no reason you couldn't.
Yeah. So I wonder, why did they identify that this was more important when they were cutting than when they were bulking or when they weren't dieting?
Sure.
Do you have any? Because I suspect part of it would simply be, you're not going to get more motor unit recruitment per se in doing those same exercises for multiple sets, but what you are going to get when you're not cutting is potentially higher baseline level of motor unit recruitment. Yeah, there's going to be high levels of motivation, there's going to be less fatigue, etc. So is it more important to choose higher variety because you're at a bit of there's a detriment there anyway in terms of motor unit recruitment, and so you need to have tools to enhance motor unit recruitment that you don't maybe need as much when you're not dieting? I wonder if that's maybe the mentality there. Obviously, they're not thinking about it in those terms, but I'm trying to work out, why else would they think this was more important when they were dieting?
I think one of the things that you told me in the past, which kind of stuck in my head, was that they definitely saw exercise variety as something that created shape and kind of appearance rather than just bulk. So I think what's happening is, as they lose body fat, they are kind of then seeing better, obviously, kind of definition. And as a result, exercise variety starts to become much more interesting because you can see the differences. I mean, like if you've got a level of body fat that's a bit high, you can't really see necessarily the shape and the difference that happens from two different elbow flexor exercises, or a couple of different back exercises, or a couple, kind of delta exercises. You can't see what's changing. It's just like hidden. So I wonder whether actually it's just kind of that, because they were in a period of time when they were able to see the kind of shapes that the muscles were forming underneath the skin, you kind of become attracted to doing exercises that make different parts of the kind of muscle become more visible. It could be that simple.
Yeah, potentially. It sounds viable, yeah. And, it's worth noting as well that, like I mentioned with Steve Reeves, his plan, which was almost identical to this, was not just a dieting plan. So obviously there were bodybuilders who were training in this way. I mean, Grimmick obviously did very similar. Most of Hoffman's stuff was very similar, single sets, many exercises. So it's not like they were saying, you only do this when you're dieting. It just so happened that Reg tended to do multi-sets, and when he was dieting, he did say, hey, I recommend these single sets.
Yeah. I mean, really, kind of when you look at sort of the Reg programs which have that are designed more for kind of non-dieting periods, I guess, they tend to have fewer exercises. They tend to be multi-joint stuff, and he's kind of training more like a power builder. So he's almost
bulk and power. He very clearly would use those terms.
Yeah. So it's kind of like he's training for it's almost like you're saying this part of the year he's training for strength, and maybe even thinking about his numbers more than he is kind of what he looks like.
Which is fair, because he was obviously working towards 500-pound bench.
Sure, exactly. So it's almost like his goals change, and so then he kind of goes into this period of time when, so maybe as they call it, the word definition kind of period is not really kind of perfectly lined up or continuous with a cutting period. It's just that this is a period of time when he's thinking more like a bodybuilder and less like a strength athlete. So the reality is that definition and diet may not be perfectly coterminous terminologies. They may just kind of be sort of slightly kind of coterminous. They're just or simultaneous. They're just kind of like, the definition period starts here as he starts training like a bodybuilder, and then at some point in that period of time he switches over to dieting, because that's obviously the purpose of the sport, to end up with a low body fat level. So that may be the way to see it. So in the reality then, this wouldn't necessarily be a true kind of dieting plan. It would literally just be a bodybuilding plan.
Yeah, essentially it's a
which is actually how we're seeing it. Which is kind of how we're seeing it. But that's actually true, because the reality is there isn't really a kind of, I mean, honestly, there isn't really a way to avoid, there isn't really a way to avoid doing all the exercises that you need to do. I mean, if you are dieting, you need to make sure that you're not experiencing atrophy very much, and you need to make sure that you are targeting, therefore, all the muscle fibers that you are trying to develop. And that means you need a full list of exercises. You need to do those 3 times a week. And you want to do them without creating a large amount of fatigue. So you need to keep the loads heavy or moderately heavy. I mean, really, like we were saying, apart from adjusting some of the exercises, if we were kind of rewriting this, we would probably have, do you want to just follow this through in terms of the muscle groups as they're listed?
Let's do that.
So if you're starting out then with side delt, nothing wrong with a lateral raise, although I would probably prefer a machine just for the stability, but I don't have a problem with lateral raise.
Yeah, I'm programming a lot of cable lateral raises at the moment. Yep.
In terms of that front raise, I'm not sure that would be my kind of preference. I'd rather have an overhead press, partial range of motion for the front delt.
Yeah, I know you're not a fan of that exercise. It's one I've actually been playing with myself lately, and I do quite like it, especially if you're doing it in a seated position, alternating or single arm at a time. But it's not one I've programmed a lot in the past, so I would normally do like a sagittal plane overhead there.
Yeah, no, I think that, and if it's partial, then you're definitely guaranteeing some really solid anterior delt involvement. In terms of curls, we literally did the episode on this, kind of a couple of weeks ago. So obviously, incline cable curl, incline bench cable curl, preacher curl, and kind of something for the brachioradialis, whatever that might be. I like easy
Which
bar
is
with
one thing I
elastic
would
resistance,
point
but
out that a lot of these silver era guys did not. They talked about doing reverse grip curls, but I never see them program them very often.
yeah.
But again, if you are using barbells and dumbbells, you're getting a lot of brachioradialis anyway.
In terms of triceps, I would, if I'm programming, more than one exercise for triceps, it's probably going to be a standing triceps push down and dips if people are happy with those, but not everybody
you
is.
think we could just get rid of one of these because,
Well,
like
maybe.
the skull crusher, that we would change for a cable push down,
Totally.
and then really maybe keep the dips in. I don't know that we
would
need
personally
another
keep
one.
the dips, but again, we certainly don't need another one. But again, it really depends on what people feel comfortable with. Not everybody's comfortable doing dips, but yeah.
And
for
bear in
me,
mind, if you've got a
too.
sagittal plane overhead, obviously you're getting decent triceps
Getting some
stimulus
there,
with that as well.
Totally. So it definitely doesn't need 3. In terms of chest, wide grip bench is going to be really, really solid option, as is dumbbell fly or machine kind of fly. I'm not sure I really need anything else, to be honest, unless unless it's a particular personal weakness that somebody has.
That's kind of why I like the front raise, to be honest, because you are getting at least a little bit there too, like both delts and chest.
Yeah, totally viable.
The pullover is an interesting addition here.
Yeah. Again, I think this is kind of one of those areas where you have to kind of look at the person and see what their weaknesses are and what kind of physique they want to develop. I actually kind of really like better that sort of bronze silver era kind of physique over the kind of later golden era physique where kind of people look like they're walking around with cushions shoved up their t-shirts. It looks a little bit kind of weird to me, but everybody's got their own preferences. Kind of into back, really, I wouldn't have a barbell row, but then this is an equipment limitation, I think. I think really we would program kind of a sagittal plane row probably with a machine. But
yeah. Or if you can't use a machine, you would at least do that maybe with a dumbbell, a bent over one arm dumbbell.
Yeah, probably. Barbell row is just horrid for kind of stability. It just moves you around all over the place. So then, I would probably then just do a Kelso because I'd be sitting in the machine that would allow me to do a Kelso. That pull down, obviously, fine. Probably wouldn't program deadlifts. Honestly, I'd probably just because the take a lot of setting up and energy to do, especially in a dieting period. I'd probably program the 2 hamstring variations, leg curl in a seated position, leg curl in a lying position, honestly, just because they're so easy in a calorie deficit.
I would only do that if I knew I had a squat in as well. Otherwise, like we've talked about in the past, I want some kind of...
Or a leg press? Or do you
Well, do you
specifically want a
think
squat?
though, I specifically want some kind of hip hinging type, like weighted exercise
Okay.
to get maybe some of the, rectors or just some of that musculature that you may not be getting with these isolated exercises.
In which case, stiff leg would be my favorite to do that, because I think it is quickest to set up.
Yeah.
Out
So I would
of all
normally
of
program
the...
that as a stiff
Yeah.
leg rack pull.
Sure. And honestly, that is probably the fastest one to get through and the least offensive from an energy point of view, I would guess. I certainly would not do a squat in preference to that. But again, whatever is easier. But yeah, I think we're on the same wavelength there, really. So then, yeah, I would probably have a leg. If you're doing that stiff leg, then obviously your alternative will be in the lying leg curl, because your stiff leg and your lying leg curl are going to give you kind of good kind of carryover, or not carryover, complementary
Synergy.
muscle groups. Yeah, synergy. That's the one. And then obviously leg press I would probably have, and then knee extensions, and then standing calf raise.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we're not changing this massively. I mean,
You could probably throw a glute exercise in there.
Of course,
seated
yeah.
abductions.
Obviously, you'd need something for glutes. He's not got any glute in there. We should have said that, shouldn't we?
But
yeah.
just with 1 or 2, a hip thrust and a seated abduction, you'd have that well and truly covered.
You would have basically everything at that point. Yeah.
One thing that he did say that I didn't mention, which I think is a really interesting point, is he said you can add more exercises to this. But he said get this, he goes, but if you add more, what you may want to do then is split it up and train 6 days a week instead of 3 days a week.
Which is probably one of our most popular podcast episodes ever. Like number 3 that we did, I think.
And I think that becomes more interesting in the context of dieting, because motivation levels are probably going to drop. Your ability to do 20, 25 different exercises in a session is probably going to be more limited than when you're well fed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it probably does make sense at that point to maybe split it up.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And to be honest, it's still a question that I get, and I think we covered this really, really well in that podcast episode that we did. Was it Clancy Ross? I think we described his approach to it. But yeah, I mean, totally, you could split this up into two kind of workouts of 10 exercises, single sets. However you really wanted to do it. Honestly, I mean, I wouldn't kind of have anything that was overlapping too much, so I wouldn't have...
No, Reg talked, I think he suggested, from memory, I think he suggested starting with having your ab work on the other day, and then I forget what he suggested adding onto it. But yeah, I mean, for me, when I split stuff like this, and I don't do it often, but if someone has access to a home gym or something like that and it just works better for them, I'd often actually take out the quads, and I would put the quads on as their own little mini workout on those alternate days. I find generally there's not going to be a whole stack of overlap, maybe with glutes, but that's about it. But I find most other muscles are going to be a little bit difficult to have no overlap if you're doing 6 consecutive days.
Yeah. I mean, especially if you're doing the kind of the stiff leg deadlift variation, then you kind of are going to end up feeling everything the following day.
Yeah. So I guess the framework we're working here with is single sets, high variety. We're saying low to moderate repetitions. And I like that he's talked about these moderate reps, because obviously I've made this well known in the past. I like that idea of not having to do heaps and heaps of warm-up sets. And if someone can get away with doing 5 or 6 repetitions without warm-up sets, go for gold. I struggle.
Last time we talked about this, it was exercise specific, wasn't it? I mean, that's what it comes down to. I mean, like, I can literally sit down in a number of machines and do 2 or 3 warm-up reps, and then I can do a set of 6, no problem at all. But not on every machine. It's just a couple of machines.
Yes.
So I think everybody's going to have their own kind of specific set of machines that is doable on, and then the rest you maybe have to drift up to 8 to 10. And I think you just have to kind of work with what you're comfortable with.
Which I think is an important point, because if you were to write out this plan, if I was to write this plan out as it is with the 20 exercises or whatever, I would do one or two things. If I was giving it to a client, I would actually say, I want you to do, I would probably say 5 to 12 repetitions, which is a huge range. And I would communicate that and say, basically, I want you to do as few as possible that you feel good doing, that doesn't take heaps of setup and heaps of warm-up.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And for me, if I was doing this plan, some of those exercises I'd be doing 5 or 6 repetitions, and some of them I'd be doing 10 to 12.
I can almost always make it work with 8 to 10, but yeah, I see what you're doing there. I mean, that's it. It's just, there's going to be some exercises when it's totally possible and some where it just feels utterly miserable. And I mean, but this is actually a really good, really important point, a really good opportunity to make a very important point. So, physiologically, from a recovery point of view, kind of 4 to 6 repetitions is always going to be the best zone to be working in. I mean, that's just physiologically how it is. But practically, there are quite meaningful implications of doing that, which you've pointed out, which is that some exercises you are going to need to really stack in an extra substantial number of warm-up reps and faff around with kind of setting the machine up the way you want it, even fetching plates and carrying them across the room. You are going to end up putting more energy in than you are saving by focusing on that really tight repetition. I've had people talk to me and say, "Oh, I'm always trying to stay in that 4 to 6," or they've even said to me, I'm always trying to stay around 5 and I'm using micro plates to load." And I'm like, okay, this is taking things a little bit far and also neglecting that really important practical implication side, which is that if it's costing you more to do that, then it's not worth doing it. Kind of like take this as an overall kind of investment of your energy and go, is it easier for me to just do a set of 8 reps or 9 reps or 10 reps and then move on to the next thing? Or, than it is kind of trying to really finesse things to make sure that I land on the 5, 6 kind of reps zone. But it's cost me extra warm-up reps. It's cost me walking around the gym, fetching plates. It's cost me setting the machine up and getting the situation the way I want it and all that kind of thing. Let's not forget that those are all costs as well.
Yes.
We have to take it all as around.
Well, sometimes people will send me plans. I'll send me, screenshots of other plans or whatever, and I'll see it. It'll be like, standing calf raise sets of 5. And I'm like, okay, for some people, fine, that'll work. For God, I would have to use 2 different gym pins and go still, 8 different 20-kilo plates to make that work. And to give that to if you know the client, fine.
You're just going to have a gym partner following you around, sitting on the machine,
just collecting weights, exactly,
and holding weights at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, you look at these silver area guys, and sometimes they jump on people's backs,
little
and
guys sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. And to indiscriminately just give that out and say, look, everyone should do sets of 5. It's like, well, should they? Is that really going to work for everyone? I don't know that it's going to be. I mean, you do a seated abduction. It doesn't matter how many weights you strap on that. For me, I wouldn't be able to make that heavy enough for a set of 5, maybe single leg.
Well, that's what I've ended up doing with a lot of stuff, is just to avoid. But again, this is actually another important point, the same vein, which is that a lot of people say to me, "Oh, I can't do the single limb stuff because, again, it's taking up too much time." But again, if you get to a point where you're quite strong, then actually single limb starts to make a lot more sense, because the alternative is, again, stealing every single plate in the gym and aggravating people and, kind of having setups that aren't, 100% safe in certain circumstances. And actually having single limb stuff then becomes the least worst option. So this is all about trying to exercise a little bit of intelligence and going, what is the best path through this scenario? In some situations where the gym sort of the machine stack goes up quite a long way, and I'm feeling comfortable, I can literally just sit down, do a bilateral exercise, and it's 4 to 6 reps and fantastic, great. That is absolutely not going to apply to most people all of the time, and it's not even going to apply to me all of the time. So we've got to have these options.
Yeah. So my hierarchy there is what you said, the bilateral exercise for low repetitions, perfect. And then I say, if that's not an option, add repetitions as long as you're getting to what the rep in reserve target is. So if you're going to 0 reps in reserve or 1 rep in reserve or whatever, I just want you to add repetitions until you get there. If I've told you to do a set of 5 and it's not feasible, do a set of 8, do a set of 10. And then I tell my clients, once I'm maybe a little bit more liberal here, but if we're doing single sets, I say, if you're doing a single set and you get to 15 repetitions, we're now getting into that exercise.
It's a hard cap.
Yeah. And I say, we're now doing that as a unilateral.
Yeah.
And then if the unilateral still takes you up to 15, we're now changing the exercise.
Yeah.
If we're doing multi-sets, my cap is 10 to 12.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's pretty solid, I think. Yeah. But again, it's, I mean, like, a lot of this is going to come down to kind of what equipment is available. I mean, like, even within the same gym, I mean, like, there's a gym that I go to near where I'm staying at the moment, and there's 2 separate rooms. And one of the rooms, generally speaking, the kind of gym stack of each machine, the stack of weights on each machine tends to cap out quite low. And I would have to kind of use pretty much the entire stack bilaterally, and I can kind of make it work unilaterally. But if I go next door, then suddenly I've got a lot more scope, and the machines are really, really heavy duty. I can stack kind of 20 kilo plates on, and I can really get it to a point where I could probably do 1 rep max testing if I wanted to. I mean, that would be very easy for me in that scenario. So, but again, that's going to vary across different gyms in different parts of the world, and everyone's going to have a different set of challenges. So we can't kind of give these sort of hard and fast rules about this machine you need to do this and this machine you need to do that, because everybody's going to have different scenarios in the circumstances that they're in. And that's why I think this kind of hierarchy that you presented is really important, that, you know, people have an algorithm that they can work through.
So are there any other considerations? So we're saying single sets, high variety, high frequency.
Realistically, you could, if you felt that. So again, this is now looking at things from the point of view of troubleshooting. If we've got a list of exercises, we've already identified one troubleshooting kind of thing, which is you could split the workout in 2, and you could do kind of upper lower 6 days a week. So you could be doing basically every other day, but with a day off once a week, and then kind of you're switching between upper and lower, or between any other muscle groups you want to do. I mean, it doesn't have to be upper lower. You could also leave a rep in reserve. So if you were feeling like you were not recovering, then leaving 1 rep in reserve is probably going to be the single. Actually, it's the only way you can really manage it at that point, because we're already down single sets, and we don't want to have a lower training frequency. So the only place you've got is reps in reserve. If you've got on certain machines the option to, and this is going to be a very small list of machines where this applies to, and maybe it doesn't apply to any of the machines that you're currently using, but there may be certain scenarios where you can drop the weight and not have an eccentric phase. But other than that, really the only thing you can do is leave a rep in reserve. So that would be the only other thing
you would not want to do necessarily on every muscle.
Not necessarily, no. You could just pick the ones where you feel like that it's not recovering. So, you know, the classic ones might be chest, biceps, triceps, maybe hamstrings. Really, the rest of it should be right.
Would you do that with chest, though? If you're losing that passive tension, would that be an issue there?
Are we talking about dropping the weight, or are we talking about
to get rid of the eccentric?
Talking about dropping the weight. Yeah, I mean, ultimately that is going to be a consideration. So if you feel like there's a muscle that's developed a decent chunk of sarcomerogenesis, then obviously you don't want to drop the weight. But that is going to apply to, upper body muscles to a degree. Not really the chest, probably the only one. Lower body muscles, it will apply to, so probably can't do there.
Or you could do it for, if you had multiple exercises, you could do it for.
Sure. I mean, again, looking at the kind of, because sarcomerogenesis really, I mean, this is an interesting point, actually. from the new data that's coming out on Nordics and maintenance, it looks like with maintenance for sarcomerogenesis is a lot lower than it is for hypertrophy. So it looks like we can get away with training sarcomerogenesis either less frequently or with kind of fewer repetitions. So yeah, you could drop it for one of the exercises. I mean, it's highly unlikely that you're going to have 2 exercises with the same muscle where it's possible to drop the weight. I mean, come on, how many exercises is it even going to be possible for? A very, very
I'm
small
thinking in my
number.
head, I'm like, I don't really know any way I
Very,
could do
very
that.
small number. Very, very small number.
Yeah.
Realistically. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, like that kind of comes back to. Let me give a very, very, very interesting example. So last time, when we talked about glutes, I mentioned that we would probably have a leg press for the sarcomerogenesis adaptation in the glute. Now, the interesting thing here is that in terms of hypertrophy, which is fiber cross-sectional area increases, what you're getting then is overlap between the leg press and the hip thrust that you're already programming. So you program a hip thrust, you add in the leg press to get the sarcomerogenesis, but the leg press is also duplicating some of the motor unit accruement and hypertrophy kind of adaptation that you're getting in the, it's duplicating some of the hypertrophy adaptation that you're getting in the hip thrust, but only up to a certain level of accruement. So the reality is, in the context, I'm going to repeat that, in the context of a glute training program where you're doing a hip thrust and you add in a leg press to get sarcomerogenesis, you actually don't need that leg press kind of every session.
Yes.
If the goal is to train,
if it's just for the sarcomerogenesis, yeah,
right, of the glute. Obviously, if you're doing it for quads and you're doing it for adductor magnus hypertrophy, then this is completely irrelevant. But if the glute is in that context, I'm doing this to kind of outline a scenario here. Then you are literally just doing the glute doing the leg press for the glute sarcomerogenesis. You could actually just do that once a week in the context of a training program like this. You don't actually need to do it every single time. But if you're doing that leg press also for quad, also for adductor magnus, then you do need to do it every single time. So it's like a very, very small detail that you can kind of see happening literally just because of the way the sarcomerogenesis physiology works.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I actually program that with squats and leg extensions. So often what I'll do is leg extensions each quad day.
Same idea for quad. Yeah, you absolutely could do that. Yes, you could. Yeah, totally.
And I find that would be my default in full body sessions that are getting too long, is to take out that exercise that you're using for stretching mediated hypertrophy and do that on alternate sessions.
Yep, could do that. Yep, totally. I think there's some very, very kind of tiny little bits of finessing. I mean, that's what we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
There's some tiny little bits of finessing that we could do. But honestly, really, there's not a lot that you can play with other than that single rep in reserve to try and reduce some of the fatigue that you're experiencing.
There's one other thing I do sometimes, and this is arguably a little bit more difficult to program across the board, but when I have someone who, some people are going to be more susceptible to strength loss and a deficit than others. And that's often going to come down to even just how much weight they've got to lose. And if you are seeing like a fair bit of mass change, and obviously there's going to be changes in leverages, and some people are going to get weaker, and that doesn't necessarily mean muscle loss, but there's just been changes that have occurred. And that can be quite demotivating for some people to be doing the same lifts and getting weaker. And so sometimes I will look at programming differences in terms of repetitions that maybe we don't normally use, just to get someone out of the head of comparing to the numbers they're used to. And that can be challenging if they know what their numbers are for, 5 to 12 repetitions. So in some of those exercises where one is more susceptible to strength loss, let's say, maybe some barbell exercises, multi-joint exercises, whatever, I might give them clusters on those exercises. And so even if there is some strength loss and we're using a 5-rep max, it doesn't really matter. If that 5-rep max is now a 4-rep max and you're doing clusters with it, it doesn't particularly matter. And so they don't notice that strength loss.
Yeah, that's an interesting, again, finessing point that's kind of helpful to just keep the motivation in the right place, which, is super important because, we're always trying to keep recruitment as high as we can.
Is there anything else, any other tidbits for people who are programming when they're dieting, or is it that sort of?
No, I think with
covered.
that, I mean, I guess I've been kind of really just impressed with the routine that you kind of unearthed or created, I guess, from Reg's guidelines. You know, I mean,
Constructed,
it's
yeah.
just really close to what we'd end up with physiologically. So, just again emphasizing how close physiologically directed programming is to kind of silver era programming before anabolic steroids made it impossible to see what was going on. You know, and this entire message of this podcast that we do together is just literally that the message that the mainstream bodybuilding community has been pushing the last couple of decades, which is that, you know, we know what we're doing because we're big, is garbage. It's complete nonsense. It's like, no, that's absolutely not true. You don't know what you're doing because you're big. You know, those guys kind of in the silver era knew what they were doing because they had to know what they were doing to get big. You know, mainstream bodybuilding today doesn't need to know what they're doing to get big at all. And as a result, they're just talking absolute nonsense all the time. But, you know, randomly, I guess, kind of ended up with a physiological model that then when we started talking together about silver era bodybuilding, it became clear that, you know, there were actually enormous overlap between what physiology implies is probably the best way of training and what those guys were already doing. So, you know, I think it's been such an enormous amount of propaganda that's gone out in the last couple of decades in mainstream bodybuilding, which is that, you know, oh, no, we're the guys who are doing it all the time. We know what we're talking about. Well, no, you don't, you know, at all. Very, very, very interesting.
This wouldn't work if we were looking at the silver era and what they were saying didn't make sense physiologically. Like,
that's exactly right.
This is not just an appeal to the past and us saying, oh, well, they used to do this like that, therefore it's best. This is literally us saying they had no other option of getting big. What they did had to work because there was no anabolics. And if our physiology doesn't match up with that, then the physiological model is probably wrong.
But the physiology does. It's the evidence-based that doesn't.
Well, exactly. Well, that's my point. That's exactly my point is that we had a model, you had a model looking at this stuff and be like, yeah, well, obviously that all makes sense because, you know, if your model didn't match up with that, then the model probably didn't make sense, right?
That's the point. We've basically got a barbell strategy to figuring out how the world works. On the one hand, you take a group of people whose practical experience had to work because they had no other option.
Yes.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, you take physiological analysis, which is from ground up, from things like size principle, mechanical tension, you know, and fundamental understanding of how motor unit recruitment is allocated through the neuromechanical matching principle. And you take those two, like, completely different approaches to solving the problem, and you end up in exactly the same place. That's a pretty big hint from the universe that you are onto something. Really, I mean, like, if you get the same answer with two completely different, I actually do this when I talk about sprinting biomechanics and I explain to people how I think sprinting biomechanics works. I take them through one analysis, which is using one set of kind of data points, and I get to an answer, and then I switch and I actually teach them in a completely different way, and we build it up looking at things completely differently, and we get to exactly the same answer. And I think that's an extraordinarily powerful approach, because if you can get to the same answer in multiple different ways, then you can be pretty confident that ultimately you're getting the right answer.
Yeah.
If all of your analyses come to different answers, then there's something underneath all of that you're not understanding.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you guys for listening. I guess we're kind of concluding with the best plan for dieting is kind of the best plan all the time, but I guess you've got less. Anyway. Yeah, but you've got less margin for error, I guess, when you're dieting because of things like motivation and recoverability and whatever else. So you just need to be more aware. But you could certainly take one of these plans that would be a good dieting plan and just follow that. I mean, this is my gains maxing group, basically. Like what we've just talked about today, that's it. That's what I'm doing with guys who want to get as big as possible. So it doesn't.
Which is why I said I genuinely think that this idea of definition that the Soviet era had doesn't line
Yeah.
up perfectly with our idea of a kind of a dieting phase or a cutting phase. I actually think that their idea of definition probably was closer to just bodybuilding.
Maximizing every muscle region
don't
possible.
think it was necessarily the same as what we would see it. So
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. They just didn't really see much of a difference. That's my gut feel on this.
Yeah.
Because as you say,
I think,
the same program would be applicable in all situations.
I think what you've suggested there with Reg makes a lot of sense as well, with some of those performance strength targets sometimes. Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us for this unfolding conversation as we went. Hopefully it is valuable and interesting to you as well. If not, well, I've had fun. So join us next week, and don't forget to put your email on the email list for a launch offer that'll be coming your way in the next couple of weeks.